Helen Albright sat in her sunlit kitchen, the delicate aroma of freshly baked peach cobbler filling the air. Her home, nestled in the quiet outskirts of Oak Ridge, Alabama, reflected her meticulous nature. The white lace curtains, spotless countertops, and neatly arranged mason jars of preserves on the shelf spoke of a life lived with order and pride. Helen was a respected widow in her small southern town, admired for her charity work and unwavering commitment to family values. Yet, beneath her polished exterior lay a heart weighed down by the scars of betrayal. Her late husband's infidelity had taught her a bitter lesson: trust was fragile, and family honor was everything. Her son, Nathan, was the center of her world. At 28, he had grown into a fine young man, handsome, intelligent, and kind-hearted. As a civil engineer, Nathan had recently completed a major project in Atlanta and returned to Oak Ridge to be closer to his family. The townsfolk spoke of him with admiration, often remarking on his striking green eyes and his easy charm. Helen saw Nathan as her greatest achievement, a testament to her sacrifices and unwavering devotion. When Nathan announced that he had met someone special, Helen's initial reaction was cautious optimism. She wanted nothing more than her son's happiness, but she also harbored the quiet hope that his future wife would be someone who embodied the values she held dear. Someone who could seamlessly integrate into their close-knit community. That hope began to waver the moment she met Sophia Larkins. Nathan introduced Sophia during a family dinner one warm evening in July 2022. The young woman's beauty was undeniable. Her auburn hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and her smile radiated warmth. Sophia's voice, though melodious, carried a subtle depth that caught Helen off guard. And her hands, delicate yet slightly larger than most women's, lingered in Helen's mind long after the evening ended. Despite her polite demeanor, Helen couldn't shake a feeling of unease. Sophia's background only deepened Helen's suspicions. She was from Atlanta, a bustling city that Helen found too chaotic and morally ambiguous for her taste. A successful graphic designer, Sophia spoke passionately about her work during dinner, but Helen noticed how skillfully she avoided discussing her childhood. She chalked it up to nerves, but doubts began to form, small and insidious, like cracks spreading across the surface of a porcelain vase. Nathan, oblivious to his mother's growing concerns, seemed utterly smitten. Over the weeks that followed, he often spoke about Sophia with an enthusiasm Helen hadn't seen in years. He described her kindness, her creativity, and her resilience. "She's the one, Mom," he said one evening as they sat on the porch, the setting sun casting golden light over the sprawling garden. "I've never felt this way about anyone." Helen smiled tightly, her fingers clutching her teacup a little too hard. "She seems lovely," she replied, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. In truth, Helen's unease was turning into an obsession. Sophia was too perfect, too poised. And then there were the little inconsistencies, the way her stories about her past seemed rehearsed, the way she avoided eye contact when childhood memories were brought up. Helen began to dig, starting with casual questions to Nathan about Sophia's family and upbringing. Her son, ever the optimist, dismissed her concerns with a laugh. "Mom, you worry too much. Sophia's amazing. You'll see." But Helen couldn't let it go. Her instincts, honed over years of navigating life's complexities, told her that something wasn't right. Her suspicions were further fueled by a passing comment from her nosy neighbor, Clara Simmons. "Your son's fiancée," Clara whispered during a church gathering, "she's got an air about her, doesn't she? Like she's hiding something." That comment was the final push Helen needed. Late at night, in the privacy of her room, she began her investigation. Social media profiles, online articles, and even a few discreet calls to Atlanta, Helen left no stone unturned. What she found at first seemed innocuous. Sophia's life appeared unremarkable, her achievements impressive but not unusual. Yet, the absence of certain details, the lack of old family photos, the vague references to her upbringing, only fueled Helen's suspicions. Nathan's announcement of their engagement in August sent the town into a buzz of excitement, but Helen's mind was elsewhere. She watched Sophia carefully during the engagement party, noting the moments when her smile faltered or her gaze shifted uncomfortably under the weight of polite questions. When Helen overheard a fragment of a conversation between Sophia and her friend Grace, the words, "new beginnings," and "bravery" sent a chill down her spine. As the summer days melted into autumn, Helen's unease grew into a dark determination. She couldn't bear the thought of Nathan being blindsided by a secret she was convinced Sophia was hiding. For Helen, family was sacred, and she would protect it at all costs, even if it meant uncovering truths that could shatter her son's happiness. Unbeknownst to Nathan and Sophia, Helen's investigation was about to take a dangerous turn, one that would set their lives on a collision course with tragedy. Nathan Albright had never considered himself a romantic, but meeting Sophia Larkins changed everything. Their first encounter at a professional workshop in Atlanta in September 2020 was as unassuming as it was serendipitous. Nathan, distracted and running late, bumped into Sophia in the bustling conference hallway, sending her portfolio scattering to the floor. Embarrassed, Nathan apologized profusely, helping her gather the glossy pages of creative designs. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the chaos of the workshop faded into the background. Sophia's auburn hair framed her face like a soft halo, and her easy laugh dispelled Nathan's nervous stammering. Over the course of the workshop, they kept gravitating toward each other, sharing coffee breaks and exchanging ideas about their respective fields, civil engineering and graphic design. Sophia's passion for her craft and her vision of using art to inspire social change fascinated Nathan. By the end of the day, he'd mustered the courage to ask her to dinner. That evening, over candlelight in a small Italian restaurant, they discovered a shared love of travel, literature, and late-night conversations about life's deeper questions. Their relationship blossomed quickly. Weekend visits between Atlanta, where Sophia lived, and Oak Ridge, where Nathan had recently returned to work, became the highlight of their weeks. Nathan was captivated by Sophia's resilience and warmth, qualities he hadn't realized he needed in a partner until he met her. Sophia, in turn, was drawn to Nathan's genuine kindness and unwavering support. She had spent much of her life shielding her true self from judgment, and for the first time, she felt safe enough to imagine a future free of secrecy. But secrets don't dissolve overnight. For Sophia, the growing intimacy brought joy and trepidation in equal measure. She knew that if her relationship with Nathan was to have any real future, she would need to tell him the truth. She had lived the first 20 years of her life as Aidan Larkins, a young man struggling with an identity that never felt right. Her journey to becoming Sophia had been fraught with challenges, bullying in school, the fear of rejection from her family, and the immense courage it took to transition. By the time she met Nathan, she had been living as her authentic self for nearly a decade, but the fear of societal judgment still lingered. The decision to tell Nathan weighed heavily on her. What if he didn't understand? What if it shattered the bond they had built? In June 2021, on a warm summer evening by the Chattahoochee River, Sophia finally found the courage to share her truth. They sat on a blanket under a canopy of stars, the gentle sound of the water lapping against the shore creating a tranquil backdrop. With trembling hands, Sophia reached for Nathan's and began to speak. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's important, and I want you to hear it from me." Nathan's brow furrowed with concern, but he squeezed her hand reassuringly. "You can tell me anything, Sophia." Taking a deep breath, she recounted her story, her struggles, her journey, and the person she had become. She told him about Aidan Larkins, about the pain and isolation, and about the love and acceptance she had found within herself. When she finished, she couldn't bring herself to look at him, terrified of what she might see in his eyes. Nathan was silent for a moment, processing everything she had said. Then, gently, he tilted her chin up so she could meet his gaze. "Sophia," he said, his voice steady, thank you for trusting me with this. I can't imagine how hard that was for you. But this doesn't change how I feel about you. You are the person I love. The rest, it's part of your story, and it's made you who you are. I wouldn't want it any other way. Relief washed over Sophia in waves, and for the first time in years, she felt truly seen. They agreed to keep her past private, knowing that the conservative community in Oakridge might not be as understanding. But for Nathan, her past was a testament to her strength, not something to be hidden in shame. However, keeping a secret, no matter how justified, is rarely without consequences. When Nathan introduced Sophia to his family later that year, he was confident they would embrace her as he had. But Helen Albright was not easily swayed. Though outwardly polite during their first meeting, Helen's watchful eyes missed nothing. She noted how Sophia skillfully deflected questions about her childhood, how her voice occasionally dipped into a lower register, and how her mannerisms sometimes seemed practiced. To Helen, these observations were more than quirks, they were red flags. Her unease grew during the engagement party in August 2022, where she overheard Sophia's friend Grace Lynn mentioning bravery and new beginnings. The words gnawed at her, feeding her suspicions that Sophia was hiding something significant. Nathan, blissfully unaware, dismissed his mother's growing concerns. "Mom, you're overthinking," he said one evening as they prepared for the wedding. "Sophia's amazing, and I've never been happier." Helen smiled thinly, unwilling to voice her doubts. But in her heart, she was certain of one thing: Sophia Larkins was not the woman she appeared to be. And Helen was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Unbeknownst to Nathan and Sophia, Helen's suspicions were about to set off a chain of events that would unravel their lives and test the very fabric of their love. Helen Albright's unease had grown from a faint whisper in the back of her mind to a constant, nagging presence. Sophia Larkins seemed too perfect, too polished. Her charm had won over the rest of the Albright family, but Helen remained unconvinced. The peculiarities she had noticed, the way Sophia sidestepped questions about her childhood, her slightly larger hands, the occasional depth in her voice, continued to swirl in Helen's thoughts. For weeks after the engagement party in August 2022, Helen replayed every interaction with Sophia in her mind, searching for cracks in the facade. But it wasn't just her observations that fueled her suspicions. Her neighbor Clara Simmons, known for her penchant for gossip, had whispered something that lingered in Helen's ears. "There's something unusual about that girl," Clara had murmured one Sunday after church. "I can't quite put my finger on it, but she doesn't seem like one of us." Those words were the spark Helen needed. She began her investigation in secret, methodically and obsessively. Late at night, when the house was silent, she would sit at her kitchen table with her laptop, scrolling through social media profiles and archived articles. Sophia's online presence was curated and professional, filled with posts about her work as a graphic designer and photos of her travels. But there was something oddly sanitized about it: no childhood pictures, no mentions of old friends or family beyond a brief reference to her late parents. The lack of personal history only deepened Helen's resolve. She decided to broaden her search, using fake social media accounts to discreetly connect with people from Atlanta who might have known Sophia. It was a slow and often fruitless process, but Helen's determination was relentless. Her breakthrough came when she stumbled upon a tagged photo buried deep in an old post by one of Sophia's former co-workers. The caption mentioned a brave new chapter, and the comments were full of cryptic congratulations. Helen's heart raced as she dug further, piecing together fragments of information. Dissatisfied with what she could find online, Helen turned to more direct measures. Using her connections in the community, she managed to track down the name of the private high school Sophia had attended in Atlanta. Posing as a distant relative researching family history, she coaxed bits of information from a sympathetic school administrator. What she learned both shocked and confused her. There were no records of a Sophia Larkins attending the school, but there was a male student named Aidan Larkins who had graduated over a decade ago. Helen's blood ran cold. The pieces began to fall into place, forming a picture she could scarcely believe. Still, Helen needed definitive proof. She hired a private investigator, draining a significant portion of her savings in the process. The investigator delved into Sophia's background with professional precision, uncovering old legal documents and medical records. What he found confirmed Helen's growing suspicions. One quiet afternoon in early September 2022, Helen sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by a neatly arranged stack of papers the investigator had delivered. Her hands trembled as she picked up a document labeled Gender Transition Confirmation. The name on the form was unmistakable, Aidan Larkins. The date was from nearly a decade ago. Helen stared at the papers, her mind racing. Her teacup slipped from her hand, shattering on the hardwood floor, but she barely noticed. The woman her son was about to marry wasn't who she appeared to be, at least, not in Helen's eyes. Anger surged through her like a storm. She felt deceived, betrayed, not just by Sophia, but by Nathan as well. Could he possibly know? Surely, he wouldn't keep such a monumental secret from her. Helen's thoughts spiraled into a torrent of fear and outrage. What would the community think if they found out? What would happen to the Albright family's reputation? As she paced the room, her mind turned to Nathan's happiness. He had seemed so genuinely in love with Sophia, so confident in his choice. But Helen was convinced that he was blind to the truth. To her, Sophia's secret wasn't just a personal matter, it was a deception that threatened to destroy everything Helen had worked to build. In her heart, Helen began to see herself as the protector of her family. It wasn't malice, she told herself, it was love. She had to act, to save Nathan from a life built on lies. The idea took root, growing stronger with each passing day. Yet, amidst her fury, Helen felt a pang of something else, something she couldn't quite name. As much as she tried to ignore it, there was a small, quiet voice in the back of her mind whispering that perhaps Sophia's journey was one of courage, not deceit. But Helen buried that thought deep, unwilling to let it take hold. Instead, she focused on her plan. She would confront this secret head-on, but not in a way that could embarrass the family. She needed to handle it delicately, decisively. After all, Helen believed she was doing the right thing, protecting her son, preserving their family's legacy. As the late summer sun cast long shadows across her kitchen, Helen began to outline her next steps. Her suspicions had turned to certainty, and her certainty was fueling a determination that would soon lead to actions she could never take back. In her mind, this wasn't the beginning of a tragedy. It was the only way to save her family from one. Helen Albright had always prided herself on being a meticulous planner. Whether it was organizing church events or preparing family dinners, every detail was executed to perfection. But this time, her planning served a darker purpose. The more she thought about Sophia Larkins and the secret she had uncovered, the more convinced she became that drastic action was necessary. To Helen, this wasn't murder, it was a rescue mission to save her son and preserve her family's honor. Her initial thoughts were chaotic, a whirlwind of what-ifs and desperate ideas. But Helen soon realized that her plan would need to be precise and undetectable. Any misstep could lead to scandal, and the Albright name would be dragged through the mud in Oakridge, the small town that prided itself on appearances. She couldn't let that happen. The first step was to determine how. Helen spent hours researching online late at night, careful to clear her browser history afterward. She learned about various poisons, their effects, and how they could mimic natural causes of death. It had to be something subtle, something no coroner would question. Eventually, she settled on a toxin derived from a plant, a substance that could cause a sudden and fatal reaction, easily mistaken for an acute allergic episode. Acquiring the toxin proved more difficult than Helen anticipated. She couldn't risk ordering it online and leaving a digital trail, so she drove to Atlanta, disguising herself with a wide-brimmed hat and oversized sunglasses. She found a small shop tucked away in a forgotten corner of the city, one that specialized in rare plants and herbs. Feigning interest in an obscure gardening project, Helen purchased the raw materials she needed to extract the toxin. Back in Oak Ridge, Helen converted her garage into a makeshift laboratory. She worked in the early mornings when the house was quiet, carefully following instructions she had printed out from anonymous forums. The process was painstaking, requiring precision and patience, but Helen's determination was unwavering. As she prepared the toxin, she repeated to herself like a mantra, "This is for Nathan. This is for our family." Once the toxin was ready, Helen turned her attention to the method of delivery. It had to be something natural, something no one would question. The idea came to her as she stood in her pristine kitchen, staring at the jars of peaches she had canned earlier that summer. Her peach cobbler was famous in Oak Ridge, a staple at family gatherings and church potlucks. It was a dish Sophia had praised during the engagement party, even asking for the recipe. Helen began perfecting her plan. She baked 2 cobblers, one for the family, laced with nothing more than her usual blend of sugar and spices, and one for Sophia, infused with the deadly toxin. To ensure she wouldn't mix them up, she marked the poisoned cobbler with a small, almost imperceptible scratch on the bottom of the baking dish. As she worked, a sense of calm settled over her. This was her purpose, she told herself. She wasn't just eliminating a threat, she was protecting her son from a lifetime of shame and deception. Yet, in the quiet moments when the house was still and the weight of her actions pressed down on her, Helen felt flickers of doubt. She would stand in the garage, staring at the vials of extracted toxin, her hands trembling. Was this really the only way? Was she truly justified in taking a life? But those moments of hesitation were fleeting. All it took was the thought of Nathan, blissfully unaware of Sophia's past, and Helen's resolve would harden once more. The opportunity to put her plan into motion came sooner than she expected. Nathan and Sophia were set to return from their honeymoon in Charleston in just a few days. Helen decided to host a family brunch to welcome them home, a casual gathering that no one would think twice about. She sent out invitations to Nathan's siblings, Laura and Michael, and their families, ensuring the event would be a lively and seemingly innocent affair. In the days leading up to the brunch, Helen rehearsed every detail. She visualized the table settings, the conversations, and the exact moment she would serve the cobbler. She imagined Sophia taking a bite, smiling as she always did when complimenting Helen's cooking. The thought brought an unsettling mix of satisfaction and dread. On the eve of the brunch, Helen stood in her kitchen, the 2 cobblers cooling on the counter. She stared at them, her chest tight with a mixture of anticipation and fear. For a fleeting moment, she considered throwing the poisoned cobbler away, abandoning her plan entirely. But then she thought of Clara Simmons and her veiled whispers, of the gossip that would spread like wildfire if Sophia's secret ever came to light. This isn't murder, Helen thought as she carefully placed the marked dish in the refrigerator. This is justice. This is protection. That night, Helen lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling as the minutes ticked by. She thought about Nathan, about the life she had imagined for him, a life free from scandal, free from shame. She thought about Sophia, about the lies Helen believed she embodied. By the time dawn broke over Oak Ridge, Helen's doubts had vanished, replaced by a steely determination. She rose, donned her apron, and began preparing for the brunch. This was the day she would save her son, no matter the cost. The plan was set. All that remained was to see it through. The morning sun bathed the Albright family dining room in a golden glow, filtering through lace curtains Helen had painstakingly ironed the night before. She had been awake since dawn, bustling about the house with practiced efficiency. The table was set with her finest china, polished until it gleamed. A vase of fresh wildflowers adorned the center, their scent mingling with the rich aroma of coffee and baked goods. Everything was perfect, just as Helen had planned. At precisely 11 a.m., the sound of car doors slamming outside signaled the arrival of Nathan and Sophia. Helen smoothed her apron and steeled herself, plastering on a warm smile as the couple entered. Nathan looked every bit the picture of happiness, his tan from their honeymoon in Charleston complementing the sparkle in his eyes. He swept his mother into a bear hug, his voice brimming with excitement. "Mom, we had the most amazing time," Nathan exclaimed. Sophia followed close behind, radiant in a flowing summer dress. She embraced Helen warmly. "Thank you for hosting this brunch. It means so much to us." Helen returned the hug stiffly, her skin crawling at the contact. "Of course, dear," she replied, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. Soon, the rest of the family arrived. Nathan's sister Laura came with her husband and 2 children, followed by Michael, the youngest of the Albright siblings. The room filled with laughter and the clinking of silverware as everyone settled in, eagerly listening to Nathan and Sophia's tales of snorkeling in crystal-clear waters and watching sunrises from mountaintops. Helen moved around the table, pouring coffee and encouraging everyone to dig into the spread she had prepared. Her eyes, however, rarely left Sophia. She watched as her daughter-in-law served herself a generous helping of peach cobbler, the marked one. Each bite Sophia took felt like a ticking clock in Helen's mind, counting down to the inevitable. Sophia's laughter rang out as she recounted a humorous mishap during their trip, but Helen noticed the faintest shadow pass over her face midway through the story. It was subtle at first, a pause, a furrow of her brow. She set down her fork, her hand trembling slightly. Helen's pulse quickened. "Are you feeling all right, Sophia?" she asked, feigning concern. Sophia nodded at first, but her expression grew uneasy. "I'm not sure. I feel a little strange." Nathan, deep in conversation with Michael, immediately turned his attention to her. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice laced with worry. "I don't know," Sophia replied, her voice shaky. "It's probably nothing, just," her sentence was cut off as a wave of nausea overcame her. She clutched the edge of the table for support, beads of sweat forming on her forehead. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Sophia. She attempted to stand, but her legs buckled beneath her. Nathan caught her just as her body convulsed in a violent seizure, her limbs jerking uncontrollably. "Call 911. Nathan shouted, cradling Sophia in his arms. Laura scrambled for her phone, while Michael fetched water in a panic. The children began to cry, their distress adding to the chaos. Helen stood frozen, the scene playing out exactly as she had envisioned, yet she found herself unprepared for the visceral reality. The sounds of Sophia's labored breathing and Nathan's frantic pleas for help pierced through her composure. "Stay with me, Sophia," Nathan begged, his voice breaking. "Please, stay with me." Helen forced herself into action, kneeling beside Nathan with a mask of concern. "She'll be all right," she murmured, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. But the words rang hollow even to her own ears. By the time the paramedics arrived, Sophia's condition had deteriorated further. Foam had formed at the corners of her mouth, and her skin had taken on a bluish hue. Nathan refused to leave her side, holding her hand tightly as they loaded her onto the stretcher. "I'm going with her," Nathan said, his voice firm despite the tears streaming down his face. The paramedics nodded, and within moments, the ambulance doors slammed shut, its sirens wailing as it sped away. Back in the now silent dining room, Helen began to clear the table methodically. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as though each action grounded her in the chaos of her mind. She picked up Sophia's plate, noting the half-eaten cobbler, and scraped the remains into the trash. She washed the plate thoroughly, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The rest of the family sat in stunned silence. Laura held her children close, her face pale, while Michael paced the room, running his hands through his hair. No one noticed Helen's calm demeanor or the way she avoided meeting their eyes. Hours later, as Nathan returned from the hospital with hollow eyes and a shattered expression, the words he spoke confirmed what Helen had already anticipated. "She's gone," he said, his voice barely a whisper. The weight of his grief filled the room, crushing the air from it. Helen reached for her son, pulling him into an embrace, whispering hollow words of comfort. But deep inside, she felt a wave of relief. Her plan had worked. What Helen didn't anticipate, however, was that this was only the beginning. The carefully constructed facade of her crime was already beginning to crack, and the truth would soon claw its way to the surface. For now, though, Helen allowed herself to believe she had succeeded. In her mind, she hadn't just taken a life, she had saved one. And for Helen Albright, that was justification enough. The days following Sophia's sudden death were a blur of grief and unanswered questions. The Albright home, once a sanctuary of order and tradition, now felt suffocating under the weight of tragedy. Nathan retreated into silence, his usually bright demeanor replaced by a hollow gaze. Helen, in stark contrast, maintained a composed exterior, presenting herself as the grieving mother-in-law. She cooked meals, answered condolence calls, and meticulously avoided eye contact whenever Nathan's shattered expression turned toward her. But beneath her calm facade, Helen was far from at ease. She knew the authorities would investigate Sophia's death, it was unavoidable. What she hadn't anticipated was the level of scrutiny the case would attract. 2 days after Sophia's passing, Detective Adam Harper of the Oak Ridge Police Department arrived at the Albright residence. Harper was a seasoned investigator, known for his methodical approach and ability to see through lies. With a notebook in hand and a sharp gaze that seemed to pierce through walls, he began by interviewing each family member present at the brunch. Nathan, his voice thick with emotion, was the first to speak. He recounted Sophia's collapse with agonizing detail, emphasizing her otherwise perfect health. "She had no allergies, no medical conditions," he said, his hands trembling as he clutched a mug of untouched coffee. "It doesn't make sense. She was fine one moment, and then," his voice broke, and he buried his face in his hands. Helen sat nearby, her hands folded neatly in her lap. When it was her turn, she spoke with a measured tone, recounting the events of the brunch with precision. "We were all sitting down to eat," she said, her voice steady. "Sophia seemed perfectly fine until she suddenly wasn't. It was so quick. We didn't know what was happening." She glanced at Nathan, feigning sorrow. "She was like a daughter to me." Detective Harper scribbled notes but said little, his sharp eyes scanning Helen's face. If he noticed her lack of genuine emotion, he didn't mention it. The other family members offered similar accounts, painting a picture of an ordinary family gathering turned tragic. But Harper's suspicions deepened and the autopsy report arrived a week later. The medical examiner determined that Sophia's death was caused by acute poisoning from a plant-based toxin, a substance rare enough to raise immediate red flags. Armed with this new information, Harper returned to the Albright home, this time with a team of forensic specialists. They combed through the kitchen and dining room, collecting samples of the leftover food and dusting every surface for fingerprints. Helen stood in the doorway, her hands clasped tightly as she watched the investigators dismantle her sanctuary. She maintained her mask of concern, but the tightening knot in her stomach betrayed her growing fear. As the investigation progressed, small inconsistencies began to emerge. Harper learned from Nathan that Helen had been unusually preoccupied in the days leading up to the brunch, spending long hours alone in her garage. Laura, Nathan's sister, mentioned in passing that Helen had been insistent about serving her peach cobbler, despite it being out of season. These details, insignificant on their own, began to form a troubling pattern. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While interviewing Sophia's co-workers at her graphic design firm, Harper spoke with Grace Lynn, Sophia's closest friend. Grace was visibly distraught, her eyes red-rimmed as she recounted the loss of her friend. After some gentle prodding, she hesitated, then revealed a secret Sophia had shared in confidence. Sophia had transitioned years ago, leaving behind her life as Aidan Larkins. She was terrified of people finding out, Grace whispered, her voice trembling. Especially in a place like Oakridge. The revelation cast the entire case in a new light. Harper now had a potential motive, a family member, possibly Helen, who had discovered Sophia's secret and acted out of prejudice or a misguided sense of protection. But motive alone wasn't enough, Harper needed proof. The turning point came when Nathan, still reeling from Sophia's death, began sorting through her belongings. In a locked box hidden in their closet, he found documents detailing Sophia's transition, medical records, legal documents, and old identification cards bearing the name Aidan Larkins. Shocked but determined to honor her memory, Nathan shared his discovery with Harper, along with a chilling realization. His mother had been acting strangely for weeks, probing him with questions about Sophia's past and insisting on hosting the brunch. With this new information, Harper obtained a warrant to search Helen's property more thoroughly. What they found in her garage was damning, traces of the same toxin that had killed Sophia, along with handwritten notes detailing its preparation. A search of Helen's computer revealed a history of visits to websites discussing poisons and their effects. But the most incriminating evidence came from Helen's own meticulous nature. Hidden in a drawer in her bedroom, detectives discovered a diary. Its pages detailed her discovery of Sophia's past, her belief that Nathan had been deceived, and her justification for what she saw as a necessary act to protect her family. The final entry described, in chilling detail, her plan to lace the cobbler with poison. When confronted with the evidence, Helen denied everything at first, her composure cracking under the pressure. But when Nathan confronted her himself, his voice shaking with a mixture of anger and heartbreak, her defenses crumbled. Tears streaming down her face, Helen confessed, insisting that she had only been trying to protect him. "I did it for you," she sobbed. "I couldn't let her ruin your life." Nathan's devastation was palpable. He stared at his mother, the woman who had always been his rock, now revealed as the architect of a heinous act. "You didn't protect me," he said, his voice barely audible. "You destroyed me." Detective Harper, listening from an adjacent room, captured every word. The truth had finally come to light, but the cost was immeasurable. For the Albright family, there would be no going back. The tragedy that began with a secret had unraveled their lives, leaving only shattered pieces in its wake. The courtroom was silent as Helen Albright, frail and pale under the harsh fluorescent lights, stood before the judge. The weight of her confession, the overwhelming evidence, and the devastation she had wrought left no room for doubt. Her attorney pleaded for leniency, citing her advanced age and unblemished past, but the judge was unmoved. "Your actions," he said, his voice measured yet firm, "were not those of a desperate woman protecting her family. They were calculated, deliberate, and born out of prejudice and fear. For the murder of Sophia Larkins, I sentence you to 25 years to life in prison." Helen's knees buckled as the sentence was read. The gallery was silent, the air heavy with a mix of grief and finality. Nathan sat in the back row, staring blankly at the proceedings, his face etched with a weariness that no amount of time could erase. For Nathan, the trial was not just a legal reckoning but an emotional one. He had lost the woman he loved and the mother who had been his guiding force, all in the span of a few short weeks. The home he once cherished now felt like a mausoleum of lost dreams and shattered trust. In the weeks that followed, Nathan struggled to find purpose. Every corner of the Albright house reminded him of Sophia, the books she had left on the shelf, the delicate sketches she had gifted him, and the memories they had built together. At the same time, he grappled with his relationship with Helen. How could he reconcile the mother who had loved him so deeply with the woman who had committed such a heinous act? Amidst his grief, Nathan found solace in a surprising place, Sophia's story. The documents he had discovered detailing her transition, her courage, and her resilience inspired him to honor her memory in a way that went beyond mourning. He began to speak out, first in small community gatherings and then at larger events, sharing Sophia's story and advocating for understanding and acceptance of the LGBTQ+ community. "She was brave in ways I can only hope to be," Nathan said during a speech at a local university. "Her life wasn't defined by her past but by her strength to embrace her future. And it's our responsibility to ensure that no one else has to suffer because of ignorance or fear." In Oakridge, the reaction to Nathan's activism was mixed. Some applauded his courage, while others whispered in hushed tones about the scandal that had shaken the Albright family. But Nathan pressed on, determined to turn his pain into progress. He established a foundation in Sophia's name, dedicated to providing resources and support for transgender individuals in small, conservative communities. Meanwhile, Helen's absence left a void in the Albright family that no one could fill. Laura and Michael struggled to navigate their own feelings of betrayal and grief. Visits to the prison were rare, and when they did occur, they were strained and brief. Helen spent her days in a small cell, her once orderly world reduced to a cold, gray reality. Her remorse was genuine, but it was too late to undo the damage she had caused. As the seasons turned, Nathan found a semblance of peace. He sold the family home, unable to bear the memories that lingered there, and moved to Atlanta to start anew. The pain of losing Sophia never fully faded, but he carried her spirit with him in everything he did. Through his advocacy and the foundation, he found a way to transform his grief into a legacy that honored the woman he had loved. The tragedy of Sophia Larkins and Helen Albright left an indelible mark on the community of Oakridge, a reminder of the consequences of prejudice and the importance of acceptance. For Nathan, it was a lesson learned at an unimaginable cost: love cannot thrive in the shadow of fear, and silence only perpetuates the darkness. What are your thoughts on this heartbreaking story? Do you think Helen's actions were justified by her belief in protecting her family, or were they purely driven by prejudice? How could Nathan have approached the situation differently to prevent such a tragic outcome? What lessons do you take away from Sophia's bravery and the aftermath of her death? We'd love to hear your opinions. Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know how this story resonated with you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that uncover the truths hidden in the shadows.